think if we look at how this issue has evolved from, I'll pick it from the early 2000s up to today, you see the consistency, you see the boldness, and then you also see the increasing sophistication of, these groups. It's a major source of worry, especially when you look at how groups in Nigeria also evolve, groups like Boko Haram and all that. But also looking at the mutations and the current dynamics of these groups, and especially also recently hearing the emergence of new groups like the lions, the dragons, and the hawks. One can only predict that if we don't take extraordinary measures, the situation might get worse in 2020 or 2024, especially when there's a new change of government. But if you look at also the fact that despite the interventions that we've put in place since especially 2012 coming, and the fact that we still have this issue not ending but also evolving, it also tells us that perhaps there is something wrong with the existing approach that we are using, or perhaps there's something we need to do differently from what we have done in the past, and therefore a need for a new paradigm shift in terms of how we approach this issue. So I will take a cue from the medical sciences that if you are sick and you go to the hospital, they don't just give you drugs. You have to go through some diagnosis and prognosis for you to get the therapy for your illness. And so for us to break the cycle, we cannot lose sight of the root causes of this problem, and also examine what has been the interventions we've put in place, what are the pitfalls or shortfalls of these interventions, and how, based on these shortfalls, we can also provide new approaches in terms of dealing with this problem. And especially when Dr. Abozo has spoken, it becomes very difficult for you to know how to even go about your presentation. But I will start, first of all, like I said, by looking at some of the root causes of this problem, what are the existing interventions and some of the pitfalls, and what I think we can do moving on. So first of all, if you look at how this issue has evolved, you can't trace it to a single cause, and you can't also trace it to a single year or election period within which we had this issue. The issues driving them are multifaceted and multi-dimensional. But I'll highlight on three of these key issues. One of them has to do with what the political parties have consistently stated, which is the mistrust of state institutions, especially the law enforcement agencies, the police, and also the Electoral Commission, in terms of guaranteeing a very credible elections. And I think when it comes to this issue, apart from the constitutional challenges and all that, I think we also need to have a very balanced discussion. That, yes, there are constitutional challenges in terms of how the police engages with these vigilante groups, but also has there been any behavioral issues concerning the police that has also given rise to these groups? I think we need to have a very balanced engagement. And if you look at past elections or past by-elections and the things that have happened and the inability or the perceived unwillingness of the security agencies in terms of dealing with it, especially what happened in 2009 in Trepone, Akwetia, Talensi, and the rest, and the manner within which the issues were responded to. I mean, they didn't give any room for these political parties to suspect that there is any issue of lack of transparency in terms of dealing with the different groups. But it is also amazing that when you are a party in government, you tend to trust the security agencies. But immediately you go to opposition, then you mistrust the same agencies that you trusted before when you were the incumbent government. And so we need to look at this issue of mistrust, which has led to the emergence of some of these groups, which were also facilitated by already existing structures like the Landguard phenomenon and also the macho men phenomenon, which has facilitated the formation of these groups. And so we need to have a balanced engagement in terms of the mistrust of state institutions, especially the security agencies. I think tied to this point is also the issue of the patronage politics that we have in this country. If you look at the operational logic of these vigilante groups, they sacrifice in anticipation of what? Rewards. One MP was telling me a situation she encountered some weeks ago, that she went to her constituent to visit them, and when she was leaving, the person told her to give him transportation money. And he was wondering, I have come to visit you, and you are asking me of transportation money. And that is the kind of logic these groups have. Once they have supported, they anticipate of what? Getting some reward. So the kind of politics, the political nature of our politics has also contributed to these emergence of these groups. So apart from the short-term pecuniary rewards that they receive, they are also anticipating provision of jobs, which some of them have alluded to, when their party is in power, irrespective of the processes that this entails. And the root cause of also this problem also has to do with the 1992 Constitution, which gives enormous power to the president in terms of the power to control state resources and also to reward party folks when they win power. And also closely related to this issue is also the socioeconomic vulnerabilities of these groups. Before 2016 election, we did some research, and one of the things we realized was that most of these vigilante groups were located in the northern part of the country. And if you look at the demographic distribution, and if you take the Ghana Statistical Service survey in terms of issues about poverty and unemployment, you will realize that there's some form of correlation. And so we also need to look at the socioeconomic vulnerabilities of these groups in the areas where they are located. Now, having said or having talked about these three key issues that I want to focus on, what has been the existing interventions? Like Dr. Agozo mentioned, we've heard the political actors, especially the President, the Minister of Interior, National Security Minister, ordering the police to deal with the vigilante-related incidents. The police also doing some arrests and prosecution of these groups, and also disbanding, calls to disband these groups by civil society organizations and other stakeholders within the election period. And also advocacy by different groups for us to deal with these groups. But if you look at all the existing interventions, now one of the issues that has led to this phenomenon from the political party's perspective is mistrust. Now you look at prosecutions, you look at call to disband and all that. Are these issues really addressing why these groups have come in the first place? If you talk about, if you prosecute them, have you dealt with issues of mistrust? If you disband them, have you dealt with the root cause of the problem? In my own estimation, I don't think we have focused more on that. Then also, the politicization of our security, institution that Dr. Agozo talked about, which has also sometimes influenced how they deal with these particular, issues. If you look at the constitutional arrangement, sometimes it's quite difficult for the police, to do what is expected of them. And we've already spoken about the security of tenure and also some of the issues that has to do with the Attorney General responding to whatever investigation the police does. Now, another issue that I have also identified is that, if you take the criminal aspect of what these, but the emergence of these groups or the formation of these groups is not one of the issues that is captured under these provisions. And so you will deal with the criminal elements of what they do, but in terms of stopping the formation of these groups, I'm not too sure whether there are any laws that deal with them. And then lastly, in terms of the shortfalls of what I see within the existing interventions, is the fact that we are talking about political vigilante groups, but in most of the programs and in most of the forums that I have been involved, including what we have today, I have not seen the vigilante groups themselves being part of it. We are talking about how to deal with them. I feel that if they are also part of the conversation, yes, we have the leadership of the various political parties here, but to what extent do what they hear from here transcend to these groups? So is it possible for us to also engage them in terms of dealing with these issues, rather than most of the time focusing on the political class, where we don't have much problem in terms of the violence that these groups undertake, but also involve them in the efforts to deal with the problem. Because, unlike terrorist groups that will say they are faceless or something, these groups, we know them, we know where they are, we know the membership of these groups. Why can't we engage them in terms of dealing with these situations? I know the police has sometimes engaged these groups, but I think we need to do more with respect to that. So I'll come to my last point, which has to do with what can be done differently to break this cycle. I don't think we can use just one approach. I think we need multiple approaches that deals with a different dimension of the problem that we are looking at. And I have also clustered them into short-term and long-term processes. Now, in the short term, at least we have 2 years to the elections in 2020. So in the short term, one of the things that I'm thinking we can do is that we need to have a sustained and deliberate action to build stronger relationship between the police, especially, and these political parties through what I call inter-party police dialogue, to build mutual trust and respect with a strong focus on equity, transparency, and accountability. I'm not looking at a structure that is only focused on the election period, but a structure that can be there, well-structured, where there will be constant engagement between the police and then these political parties in effort to build the trust for them to also, for it to also create a space through which these political parties can also frankly communicate their security concerns, expectations, and also allow the police to address their grievances, settle disputes, and also communicate their strategies to them. But this can also not be successful if we don't deal or deal with the systemic root of vigilantism, which has to do with the issue about the constitutional arrangements that underlie the appointment of the heads of the security agencies and some top members of the security agencies, but also some of the inefficiencies also of the security, agencies. And so first of all, we need to look at the appointment of the senior leadership of the various security agencies and give them some tenure of office. We can also not forget the fact that despite the role that the police especially is playing, there are some inefficiencies that we also need to deal with. And this has to do with the manpower, the capacity issues, the logistics, and the finances that they need to deal with some of these challenges. I remember in some of the, was it 2008 or so, in one of the places that we monitored, there were certain places where, if you belong to a particular party, you cannot step there because most of the security officers who are manning the police station, the polling stations, are unarmed, and so sometimes it was a bit difficult for them to even intervene in some of the issues that were happening. So we need to also look at the inadequacies of the security agencies to build them. Another long-term approach that I think we can also focus on is look at how we can also hold the political parties accountable for the excesses of these vigilante groups. And I'm taking this cue from the statute of the International Criminal Court, the ICC, where sometimes political leaders or rebel leaders are held responsible for the activities of their members. I am of the opinion that the police can do whatever they have to do, but the solution of the problem rests with the two main political parties, the NPP and then the NDC, because of the constitutional challenges that these security agencies face. So can we review or look at how we can review the Political Parties Act, for example, to make it easy or to make it possible for political parties to also be held accountable for the excesses of these groups, especially when they have accepted that these groups belong to their fold. And of course, we cannot also deal with this issue if we don't also look at social interventions program that can tackle the vulnerabilities of these groups, especially employment opportunities and also dealing with the issue of poverty and all that. But also, we also need to look at the development within the political parties themselves in terms of having rigorous education, sensitization, and reorientation programs that focuses on educating political party members, not only the vigilante groups, but also about the processes of governance, and also about using non-violent means of what? Dealing with their problem. And I think other stakeholders can also help in this regard, the NCC, the civil society, media, and then the NPC. And also, lastly, I think we also need to acknowledge the duality of the Ghanaian state, and also begin to look at how we can also use the informal actors to deal with this particular problem, especially the traditional systems of governance that we have in our different societies, especially taking a cue from what happened recently in Kumasi regarding the KNUST issue and how the traditional system was able to help deal with the problem. In conclusion, the violent activities of these vigilante groups is a threat to Ghana's democracy and a security risk to the country. The antidote to this menace, I don't think, lie in the battlefield or the confrontational rhetoric that has characterized existing responses, but rather addressing the root causes of the problem and making the services of these vigilante groups irrelevant to the political parties. And like I said, I am of the opinion that it is only the political parties that can deal with this issue, and they have to be honest about the issue and put in place measures to deal with this issue. Thank you very much.